Joe Biden edges closer, but the U.S. presidential election remains too close to call. Hello, I'm Arnold Naidu, and this is The Heat. Vote counting continues in several states as Joe Biden continues to lead President Donald Trump in the race for the White House. According to the Associated Press, the former vice president remains within 6 electoral votes from being able to claim victory. On Friday, he took the lead in 2 additional states, Pennsylvania and Georgia, as the Trump campaign continues to challenge the veracity of the count. For more, we turn now to CGTN's White House correspondent Nathan King. So Nathan, what do we know about the mood inside the White House? Is the president likely to accept defeat if it comes to that?
It's the tale of 2 White Houses today. It's bizarre. I walked around trying to speak to people. There's quite a few people not at their desks. The people I have been able to speak to are basically resigned to the fact that the electoral math and map is rapidly moving against Donald Trump having a second term. But there's an inner circle, a circle that essentially is encouraging the president on his base instincts to fight. We saw that on Thursday night here with his incredible address. And I don't use the incredible in a positive sense. It was probably the most shocking address we've ever seen from a president fighting for re-election. We have seen, obviously, through the day, launching of lawsuits. We've seen Trump's words in tweets, but also in campaign literature, where it essentially says, I will fight on, I will use every legal avenue, it's for you, I will never stop fighting for the United States, etc., etc. What we do know is that essentially none of their legal claims will change the results. Even this appeal to the Supreme Court about what they call late ballots in Pennsylvania, which are postmarked November 3rd, but can be counted up until, can be delivered up until now. The Pennsylvania authorities have already said they will set those aside and will count them later, but have set them aside. What the Trump campaign want is to have those not counted. Well, that would be about 3,000 votes. If you look at the margins in Pennsylvania, that won't make a difference, and they're growing by the hour. So the question is, you know, what happens if the Associated Press and the other TV networks call the election? Of course, that doesn't certify the election. I mean, that's up to states, and that can continue well into late November. But it is customary and tradition in America when a rival reaches 270, you pick up the phone and you concede. There is no indication, and I can say that adamantly, there is no indication from the president's inner circle that that is going to happen, and that would be a huge break in tradition. There are lots of talk here at the White House about people having the conversation with him, whether it's people from outside the White House who have had a good election, like Mitch McConnell, the leader of the Senate. They've won seats in the House too. Or would that conversation come from within? Perhaps the inner circle of the president, even members of his own family, I'm not going to name names, but people who perhaps work closely with the president. That's what I've been hearing. It's all rumor, it's innuendo, because I can tell you this, the Marine that normally stands outside the entrance to the West Wing when he's in the Oval Office has not been there for days. He's in the residence, and we haven't seen him today. That's all I can say. Sorry.
Nathan, as far as the other campaign is concerned, Joe Biden and Kamala Harris are expected to address the country in just a few hours.
Right.
What are they likely to say?
Well, I mean, you know, doesn't it depend on whether we get a result? Because, you know, we woke up this morning with Georgia and Pennsylvania sort of going from red to blue as more of the vote was counted, correct? And as we know, the Electoral College math, whether you follow the AP like we do, which puts him at 264, which essentially mean Nevada would take him over at the top with 6, or would it be Pennsylvania, which in any model with 20 Electoral College votes do? But it hasn't been called yet by the networks. And look, this is my 6th election. I'm not questioning the AP or anything. But given the outstanding vote, I think everyone's being very careful in not calling this race right now. And, you know, that's just my opinion. So I think it really does depend on the call, doesn't it? Because the last thing you want Joe Biden and Kamala Harris to do is come out in Delaware as the presumptive as the projected winners of this without the numbers there. So we had heard that there was going to be a speech in a couple of hours, but I think it really does depend on whether the wire services, AP, which is called every election since the mid-1800s correctly, and the trusted decision desks at everyone from Fox News to CNN to come out, because it's a very different environment if you come out and speak ahead of that. And there is a real feeling here, not just in the White House, but also, in all political establishment in Washington, that the protocols need to be followed, and that you can't claim victory outright until that 270 is hit for Joe Biden. But then things start to change very quickly after that. So I know that's a non-answer to your question, but I think it really does depend on whether in a couple of hours we get that call. And to be honest with you, Anand, I really think that call, just given the history of covering 6 elections, should come pretty soon.
Okay, Nathan, thanks a lot. That's CGTN's Nathan King at the White House. Well, there's much to talk about. Let's get to our panel. Amy Holmes is right here with us in Washington, D.C. She's a writer for HBO's Real Time with Bill Maher and a columnist for the Swiss weekly Die Weltwoche. Hilary Shelton heads the NAACP's Washington Bureau and serves as Senior Vice President for Advocacy and Policy. Political analyst Steve Chaggaris joins us via Skype. He's the political editor for Al Jazeera Online, and joining us from South Carolina is the host of America This Week on Sinclair Broadcasting, Eric Bolling. Thank you, everyone, for being with us. Eric Bolling, let me start with you. It seems that this election is steadily moving in the direction of Joe Biden. Current trends show that he is on target for what could be an unsurmountable lead and could possibly get those 270 electoral votes that are needed by late this evening or possibly over the weekend. But President Trump is not giving up. Let's listen to what he had to say.
We were winning in all the key locations by a lot, actually. And then our numbers started miraculously getting whittled away in secret. It's amazing how those mail-in ballots are so one-sided, too. I know that it's supposed to be to the advantage of the Democrats, but in all cases, they're so one-sided. And we think we will win the election very easily. We think there's going to be a lot of litigation because we have so much evidence, so much proof, and it's going to end up perhaps at the highest court in the land. We'll see. But we think there'll be a lot of litigation because we can't have an election stolen like this.
So, Eric, that was President Trump there talking Thursday at the White House. So far, we see no evidence that this is a stolen election, as the president puts it. I mean, there may have been 1 or 2 votes that were in question, but no widespread fraudulent voting. So what do you think is the president's intention here?
Well, first of all, I think it's already, as they say, as the saying goes, it's not over till the fat lady's singing. And she's either singing or warming up the vocal cords right now. So I'm not one that ascribes to there's a lot of legal wrangling that they'll be able to do. We will have a President Biden, President 46 and Joe Biden. It's just a matter of time. Here's what the president has to be doing. And as you know, I'm a very close friend of the president. I haven't spoken to him personally. They've kept him pretty much off, as Nathan points out of the Oval Office, away from everyone right now. I've talked to a lot of people in the campaign, and the feeling is this: they have to figure out what's happening right now and what the next step is. Unfortunately, they didn't plan for something what's next. I will tell you one thing. You can say goodbye to Donald Trump, but you cannot say goodbye to Trumpism. Going forward, this party is Donald Trump. So anyone that wants to make a play or become or break into or even further wants to be the next president in 2024 is going to have to play nice with Donald Trump. So right now he's probably figuring, and they're figuring out, how do they occupy, how do they become the big political entity that they will be and big media entity that they will be come the day after he concedes this election. I disagree with Nathan. It's not going to be a long drawn out fight. He will, my guess, sometime over the weekend concede.
That's right. The president did get somewhere around 70 million votes in this election. Hilary Shelton, what do you make of what the president said? Because we really are in uncharted waters at this time. You know, normally we have the election and by midnight or just after midnight, a winner is called, one concedes, one declares victory. That's it, it's over. But this is not happening this time around.
Well, let me just say there are a couple things that I think he's saying, that he's in this fight to win. that he'll continue to push forward, that like so many others in circumstances along these lines where the issues are so big and so broad, that talking about conceding at any point is not part of the vocabulary as we move through the process of talking about what's happening. So the issues for him now are talking about the unfairness of the system as he sees it, as he talks about moving forward that very well he should win, and it very well, the votes that have been mailed in or otherwise sent in by Dropbox or otherwise somehow may very well be tainted. In other words, as he's discussing it, for him to see this kind of disparity as the numbers are coming in along those lines, that something must be wrong, he's not being treated fairly, and he should be able to fully participate. In other words, he believes he should win. But the contradictions, of course, that are coming up that I'm sure we'll be mentioning as we move along, the contradictions are on one side of the equation, if it is a state that seems to be moving much more in favor of him, the counting should be allowed to continue. If it's a state that seems to be moving against him, then we should cut them off as soon as possible, because there's some disparities happening along those lines. But I think it's very important to remember that what's happening here is also on the backdrop of what happened in the 2016 election, and that is he won because of the Electoral College votes. Those are the rules. I'm not trying to change the rules yet, but I believe we need to seriously consider them. On the other side of the equation, you had over 3 million more votes for Hillary Clinton. But the way our system's set up, the popular vote doesn't necessarily carry the day. So it's looking at it, moving along these lines, we're seeing something very similar, but we're seeing more people turning out, period. Quite frankly, I believe when it's all over and done, we'll see that this election will turn out more people voting as we finish counting all the ballots than any other election in history. And as you remember, we said the same thing in 2008 when Barack Obama was running, because that was the highest at that point. So it's fascinating to watch how it's going now. The bottom line for all of us is we want to make sure that every eligible American is able to cast an unfettered vote and have it counted. And if they're in a state in which they were able to mail in their ballots, as long as it's postmarked, by or on election day,
right,
it should be counted as well.
All right, let me go to Amy Holmes. Amy, Joe Biden also spoke on Thursday evening from his base, which is in Delaware, in the state of Delaware. Let's listen to what he had to say.
The vote is sacred. It's how people of this nation express their will. And it is the will of the voters, no one, not anything else, that chooses the President of the United States of America. So each ballot must be counted. And that's what we're going to see going through now. And that's how it should be. And we continue to feel, Senator and I, we continue to feel very good about where things stand. We have no doubt that when the count is finished, Senator Harris and I will be declared the winners.
So, Amy, that was Joe Biden talking in Delaware on Thursday evening. You know, we've been talking for weeks now about this election. We've been looking at all kinds of scenarios. Now we have the election. Now we have something like what's going to be the final result. What do you make of the outcome?
Well, spoiler alert for our viewers, Trump is being Trump, which means being aggressive and wanting to stand his ground and have his way. He spent his entire career litigating. This is something he's very comfortable with. But I've heard people talking about, you know, normally this happens, normally that happens. There's been nothing normal about this election at all. In the middle of a COVID crisis and the mail-in ballots and the passions that are driving turnout to the highest level in American history. And normally how, you know, one candidate might concede to another. Well, we just saw 4 years ago, Hillary Clinton did not concede the night of the election. She was too shell-shocked that she had lost because all the polling showed that she was ahead. So she had to wait until, you know, you remember that she had to wait until the next day before she could bring herself to, you know, talk to all of her supporters. And remember 2000, I do very well. I was on MSNBC for night after night after night about hanging chads and, you know, people in rooms and fighting over stacks of ballots. And I mean, you remember that? It was a mess. It went all the way to the Supreme Court. So, you know, this sort of fairy tale that American elections are this clean process of a graceful transition of power, we've seen even in recent history that that hasn't been the case. But I will say that a couple weeks ago I interviewed Joe Lockhart for Die Weltwoche, and Anon, I have to congratulate you. You always pronounce it beautifully every time. And I interviewed Joe Lockhart, and he told me then that he anticipated that it would just take a couple of days, not weeks, to decide the winner of this election. And I think that that will be the case this time around. I think it's interesting, we didn't hear the clip just now, but also when Joe Biden gave his remarks to the American people, he was very conciliatory and very bipartisan. He said the presidency is not a partisan office. He intended to govern for all of the people. And I think that's in large part because his margin was so small. This was not a repudiation of Donald Trump. This was not the moral victory that Democrats were hoping to have November 3rd. So it will be interesting moving forward how Biden handles this very hot, heated electorate that came out to vote on November 3rd.
Steve Chaggaris, I want to drill down a little bit into how this happened and what's been happening over the past few weeks. If we look right now, Joe Biden leads in Nevada, Arizona, and Pennsylvania. He's already won Michigan and Wisconsin, and if he gets Pennsylvania, would it be fair to say then that he's really rebuilt this blue wall that Donald Trump shattered in 2016?
Well, I don't know if you can say that. I mean, these margins that he won, I guess Michigan, the margin's a little bit larger, but in Wisconsin and in Pennsylvania, they're very, very slim margins. And so it's really just sort of the opposite of what Donald Trump did in terms of 2016. They barely squeaked by in these places. And so I think what we've seen is that these states are split right down the middle. And part of that is because Democrats, former Democrats, are disillusioned with what's going on in Washington, with what's going on with how politicians speak to them. And we still saw some of that. I mean, there were a couple of hundred counties across the country that Donald Trump flipped from Barack Obama, who had won them in 2008 and 2012. And of those couple of hundred, Trump has won, again, 177 or so of them, and still counting. So these people who were disillusioned in 2016, former Democrats, voted for Barack Obama, are still disillusioned. 70 million people voted for Donald Trump, which in any other year would have been a record, breaking Barack Obama's record, but Joe Biden is going to get at least 75 million, so that's its own record. But still, there's 70 million people in this country who are backing Donald Trump and what he stands for, and I think you can't ignore that. You know, we went into this election thinking he was just going to have, the floor was going to be mopped with Donald Trump and the Republicans, and it didn't happen.
And I would add to what Steve says there, 70 million Americans who went to the polls to pull the lever for Donald Trump after watching him in action for the last 4 years. And they liked what they saw. And there was a lot of punditry going into November 3rd that, you know, Donald Trump had turned off all of these voters, that he was this unknown quantity in 2016 and people were rolling the dice and, you know, going to check it out. Well, they did. And he got 7 million more votes than he did in 2016.
Right, Hilary, one other thing which we saw in this election, Joe Biden got the majority of the African-American vote, but that was expected. But Trump also increased his share of the African-American vote, as well as among Hispanic voters, by significant amounts. Given that the media and Democrats have never lost an opportunity to call him a racist, to call him a bigot, to call him a charlatan, call it what you will, does that surprise you?
No, not at all. As a matter of fact, it's quite consistent. Whoever the Republican Party candidate is usually pulls somewhere between 8 and 12% of the African-American vote. And certainly Mr. Trump is very well within that grouping, as he was in 2016, in many ways the same way now. So the issues are sometimes just driven by different major concerns. Much like other communities, the African-American community is rather diverse as well. We're heavily driven by civil rights protections and other issues.
I got to dispute. I have to dispute those statistics.
Can I just jump in?
Okay, can I let Hilary finish, and then I'll come to the two of you. Okay, Hilary, go ahead, finish your thought.
No, just finishing. That was really not a surprise. It was consistent. He got a larger percentage than he did the first time, but still within that same range. So it's not extraordinary. A lot of this, of course, is also driven by economic issues, as most political scientists would say. Beyond the issues of race is the issue of economics. People often have a tendency to vote their economic interest, and they see Trump being very much there.
Okay, Emmy, I'll get to you. Eric, what do you want to say?
Well, Hillary said that the African-American community is a very diverse community, and I agree with that. But the person who doesn't agree with it the most is Joe Biden, who said the Latino community is diverse, but the African-American community is not diverse. So my point is this. Blacks are going to vote for the Democrat, no matter how bigoted and racist they may or may not be. And I'm going to push back on any anyone who calls Donald Trump a racist. He's not a, I've known him for 20 years. He's not a racist. He's not bigoted. Joe Biden has more history of saying bigoted and racist things in his lifetime, in his 47 years in Congress, than Donald Trump has in his 47 months. So it's not about who's actually bigoted and racist and which community is diverse. It's about Democrats getting the African-American vote, even though, and as Hillary's other point being, African-Americans vote for their economic future, Donald Trump lowered the black community's unemployment rate to a record low of any president in the history of the United States.
Well, maybe I could just
Amy.
slightly
Yeah.
disagree. Oh, so go ahead, Amy. I'll disagree when you're done.
Well, I think we also need to add a couple other factors. So Donald Trump, he doubled the black female vote. The black male vote went from 13% to 18%. He earned 26% of the non-white vote, the highest of any Republican candidate since 1960. This was pretty extraordinary when you consider that for the past 4 years he has been, slandered as a bigot, a racist, and the Democrats kept saying, you need to denounce white supremacy. And also add to that backdrop, of course, the Black Lives Matter protests and this, this summer of racial unrest, that Donald Trump, even with all of that weighted against him, was able to increase his share of the African-American vote. And you saw, African-American celebrities coming out to support him, or at least say, I can work with him. I might not like him. I might not even vote for him, but I can work with him. I'm thinking of Ice Cube and others.
Yeah.
So I don't think we should minimize that. I think it's fairly extraordinary, and a lot of people's jaws were on the floor, frankly.
All right, Hilary, a brief response from you, and then I'm going to get back to Steve. Go ahead.
No, just to say that the issues of racism is one that we'll probably have to dedicate an entire show to, as a matter of fact, because I think we define the terms very differently. When we think about resources being utilized in a discriminatory or biased manner, as we think about resources going to public schools as an example, job creation, small business development, issues that will be specifically helpful to the African American community is one thing. I will take exception with the point that was made about the unemployment rate. I know he was very proud of an unemployment rate that, quite frankly, he actually inherited. Mr. Obama's programs and policies, of course, being supported by Joe Biden as well, were those that set in place the scenario in which we could have such a low unemployment rate. Right. And certainly we don't want to measure it today at the end of the term as we did at the beginning.
That is 100% false, Hillary.
Okay, Eric,
well, we'll disagree
do?
and
you know
we
what
can have
you
a drink
do? You know what you just did? You just fell into your own trap. When President Obama came into office and the unemployment rate was skyrocketing, the economy was tanking.
Absolutely.
You all said that's George Bush's economy. Now, when the shoe's on the other foot,
we
you're
have
saying
to disagree
Donald Trump
we have to
can't
talk about what
inherit
we were able to do under Obama to be able to fix many of these problems. So we'll disagree with that. We can smile while we do it, but the truth of the matter is,
all right, I need to get to
passing
Steve.
bills that allowed us to fix these economic problems, like the Dodd-Frank Wall Street Reform Bill, were extremely helpful in ending our economic problems.
Had nothing to do with lowering taxes and lowering regulations, did it, Hillary?
Okay, Steve, I want to talk about something else, and that's about the U.S. Senate races. The Republicans may hold the Senate. They may retain control of the Senate. Those races, of course, are still being counted right now. There are two outstanding races in Georgia, which are very important. But tell us about the importance or the significance of what we saw happen in the Senate in this election.
Well, it's huge. I mean, there was a huge discussion of Democrats being able to take over the Senate going into election night, and these vulnerable Republican senators wound up pulling out most of their races. Colorado was the one that they lost. We're waiting to hear on the two seats in Georgia, but we were looking at Lindsey Graham. We were looking at Iowa, Joni Ernst. We were looking at Maine, Susan Collins, somebody who had not led in a poll the entire year. Of all the polls taken up in Maine, she was behind, and she wound up winning handily. And so the question is, and Democrats did pick up Arizona as well. But the question to be asked is, one, what was wrong with the polling? But two, what happened with these incumbents? There was an inordinate amount of money spent against these Republican incumbents, and it just did not work out. And I think a couple of lessons there are, one, pollsters who were polling in these Senate races were missing voters who were inclined to vote for Republican candidates. And two, just because Democrats, or any candidate, frankly, Democrats or Republicans, can raise millions and millions of dollars for a campaign doesn't necessarily mean they have a better chance of winning than the other.
Amy, should the Republicans retain control of the Senate, is Mitch McConnell going to be able to work with Joe Biden and vice versa?
You know, I think in some ways he might be able to work with Joe Biden more easily than he worked with Donald Trump or President Trump. Joe Biden, of course, is a creature of the Senate. He spent 36 years there. He knows Senate procedure very well and worked alongside of Mitch McConnell. So these are two men who've done business together. And I would imagine that President Biden would have a legislative affairs staff that knows how to interface with both the minority and majority in the United States Senate. But Mitch McConnell will be the most powerful Republican in Washington, and I think that he's going to be exercising that power. He's never shown any hesitancy to do that in the past. One more thing we haven't gotten to is the House of Representatives. Again, Democrats were expecting, huge pickups in the House. They were going to be trouncing Republicans. Yeah. Not a single Republican lost their congressional seat on November 3rd. So there's going to be some soul searching to do on the Democratic side. And I would say on the Republican side, one of the big questions that they're asking is, how can we have Trump without Trump? Those 70 million voters, all of those Hispanic and African-American voters who shifted right, we want to keep them. This was a big improvement, an achievement for us. And can we keep them without Donald Trump at the top of the ticket or stirring things up?
Right, that's an interesting point you bring up there. Eric, very quickly, is Donald Trump going to stay in politics?
I think he'll have his hand in politics. I honestly believe he will be the kingmaker on the Republican side. No one's going to be able to go through to a 22 election or a 24 election without first getting the blessing of the Donald Trump administration or Donald Trump himself. We pointed it out several times, 70 million people voted for the man, but he's become a powerhouse. Trumpism, whether you like Trump or not, I think what happened was people liked Trumpism, what he was about, being brash, pushing back on cancel culture, pushing back on political correctness. The country was barreling towards Europe, and we don't want to be Europe here. Like it or not, we just don't want to be Europe. And Trump stopped that. But Trumpism was what we all needed, what America needed. They just didn't like the man himself after a first term.
Eric, very quickly, I've got 10 seconds. Do you think he will run again in 2024? He can if he wants to.
I don't think so. I think you'll see a Donald Trump Jr. or, more importantly, who I would think should be the natural heir to the Trumpism and Trump throne would be Ivanka Trump. I'd love to see her run.
And we are going to have to leave it there. Thank you to everyone for being with us. That's it for this edition of The Heat. I'm Anand Naidu in Washington, D.C. Thanks for watching.